the MCAT Cars Podcast, session number 31. The car section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or a slow reader like me, Jack Weston and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT Cars Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, and Jack Weston and I are here to provide you with the best MCAT car skills that you can get anywhere online for free to help you improve your cars section score and your MCAT score overall. Our podcast today, we're going to talk about the Beatles. Who doesn't want to talk about the Beatles? Stay tuned after the passage for information on how you can get free passages emailed to you every day. Jack Weston back for some more MCAT Cars podcasts. I'm ready to rock out to some Beatles. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Explain what I meant by rocking out to some Beatles.
Yeah. So, I mean, right before we started this, I told you it's about the Beatles, right? And you're like, not much of a fan of the Beatles. And I'm like, yeah, me either. But, it's music. A lot of people like music. I thought your story was pretty interesting. I mean, I'm pretty sure your listeners would love to hear what you said about music and
music. So a brief history of how I got into being a podcast addict was I found out that I would fall asleep driving if I would listen to music in the car. And so I switched to sports radio, talk radio, and it would keep me awake because I'd pay attention. And then I started listening to podcasts, and the rest is history.
Nice.
So I don't listen to music anymore. So it's not anything against the Beatles. I just don't listen to music, period.
Well, maybe this article will make you reconsider.
All right. Let's hope.
Let's see.
All right. As always, follow along in the show notes. There's a link to this article from the New Yorker. To mark this month's 50th anniversary of the Beatles' 9th album, The Beatles, universally known as the White Album, several new, expanded, and enhanced editions are being released this week. All right, so we're given a kind of story here, 50th anniversary of the White Album, the Beatles, which is known as the White Album, and that there are new editions being released.
Yeah, this could get confusing because students are thinking, wait, what is the White Album? Right? But you gotta be careful. They said the 9th album, and they quote the Beatles. So for some reason, their 9th album was named after their own band, which is not
self-titled.
Uncommon. Yeah. But then they also call it the White Album. So you have to know White Album is associated with the 9th album.
Okay. All right. These new versions were created under the supervision of Giles? Guile? How do you say that?
I don't know.
Giles?
Yeah,
Giles. I think. All right. Sorry. These new versions were created under the supervision of Giles Martin, the son of the album's original producer, George Martin. All right. So we're given a name here. Who is supervising these new versions being created, and he's the son of the original producer, George. As was done last year with Sgt. Pepper, the new editions contain, along with a wealth of archival recordings and other material, a brand new, digitally remixed presentation, a laborious retrieval and reassembly of the contents of the original multi-track master tapes, with a comprehensive scope far beyond that of all previous remasters and releases. Wow. All right. So long sentence here. Lots of specific kind of audio producing words that may confuse somebody. But I think really all we're supposed to take away here is that a lot of work was done to make these.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. The results reveals what might be called the greatest record ever made, not only in terms of its innovation and its strange, impenetrable, endlessly suggestive beauty, but also because of its place at the apex of the Beatles' career and its role as an aesthetic keystone for nearly all the rock and roll recordings that have followed. Ooh, all right. So the author is basically saying that these remastered releases potentially remastered releases. I think he's talking about the remastered ones versus the original, but basically saying that their beauty, right? He uses the beauty. It's strange to call a recording a beauty, but I think the author is basically saying these are really kind of the pinnacle of audio, of music, of rock and roll, as it says later.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, as long as we're talking about the White Album and how it's being released again. New version of it is being released, and they also say it's the greatest album ever recorded. I mean, that's the key. I think if you know those things are good. I mean, there's a lot of details here on what they're doing to make it happen, or what it did include. That stuff isn't that important as long as we're talking about this album, and that we're mentioning how it's one of the greatest albums ever, right? I think you're in a great position.
Okay. All right, second paragraph. Upon returning to England from Rishikesh, India in April 1968, John Lennon and George Harrison stripped and sanded the psychedelic paintwork off of their Gibson J160E and Casino guitars. Donovan, one of the many musicians who had accompanied them to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram for an advanced transcendental meditation course, had told them that this would improve the sound. All right. So we're given some names here. John Lennon, George Harrison, Donovan, talking about a trip for this transcendental meditation course, and then doing some work on the guitars.
Yeah, so going somewhere, doing some kind of meditation, I guess, right? Sounds kind of like, the hippie generation of that time, right?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
If you take the paint and varnish off and get the bare wood, Harrison explained later, it seems to sort of breathe. Definitely hippie-ish, right? You sanding a guitar and letting it breathe. Okay. This stripping away of psychedelic symbolism was part of a larger campaign that the band undertook to remove the layers of Beatles mythology, habit, and convention that had accumulated since their beginnings as Liverpool teenagers before Germany and America, before Astrid Kirchherr's arty portraits had fetishized their mop-topped haircuts, before Ed Sullivan and A Hard Day's Night and Shea Stadium and the rest of it. So it looks like they are the author's trying to say that removing this psychedelic paint that was on the guitars, stripping away that paint, kind of potentially got them back to their beginnings before all this other stuff happened that they talk about.
Yeah, sounds good. It's very tough to follow what's going on, right? And at this point, many students are kind of confused. What's going on? Where should I go with this? Well, as long as they took some trip, right? They're doing some kind of meditation, something's going on. I think you're okay. I mean, understanding this better would be great, but it's not necessary. You don't need to understand exactly what's going on.
Okay. Psychedelia and the Beatles' influential participation in it had peaked with the release of their landmark 1967 album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The surrealist tracks on which had beguiled the world and many said inspired the Summer of Love. So it's interesting defining this phase here, psychedelia, and how the Beatles participated in it with this album. And the Summer of Love, potentially, that they kicked off.
Okay.
The American political theorist Langdon Winner observed, quote, "The closest Western civilization has come to unity since the Congress of Vienna in 1815 was the week of Sgt. Pepper album was released. At the time, I happened to be driving across the country on Interstate 80. in each city where I stopped for gas and food, Laramie, Ogalia, Moline, South Bend, the melodies wafted in from some far-off transistor radio or portable hi-fi. So we're given another name here, Langdon Winner, talking about the impact of this album.
Yeah. So are you getting positive vibes about their album or negative vibes? Like what
Positive.
Yeah.
It brought people together.
Good. There's a lot more going on here. Technically, like they're talking about this whole psychedelic image and how they kind of stripped it away before the White Album. You don't need to know all this stuff. I don't think it's that critical.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of built around them a mythology. And the Sgt. Pepper album was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you kind of have this idea that meditation and whatever is associated with their albums and they're popular, I think that's really all you need to know.
Yeah. Okay. And the last sentence here, it was the most amazing thing I've ever heard. So again, the author is just saying it was awesome. Awesome time. Okay. Next paragraph. Sgt. Pepper had its detractors. The British critic Nick Cohn complains that, quote, it wasn't much like pop. It wasn't fast, flash, sexual, loud, vulgar, monstrous, or violent. Without pop, without its image and its flash and its myths, the Beatles don't add up to much. So the author is now kind of painting an opposing view of what he or she had, giving us a specific example of this British critic saying it's not much. It's not very good.
Yeah, someone going against this, mm-hmm. right? Okay.
They lose their magic boots, and then they're human like anyone else. They become updated coal porters, smooth and sophisticated, boring as hell. End quote. So Nick Cohn just finishing his thoughts here, calling the Beatles boring because they lose their magic boots. Sgt. Pepper is called the first concept album, but it doesn't go anywhere, Lennon observed years later. The next record, he believed, would be a chance to, quote, forget about Sgt. Pepper and get back to making music. So it's interesting. They're quoting Lennon here, which we have to kind of know from previously that Lennon is a Beatle. And it looks like Lennon is agreeing that maybe Sgt. Pepper wasn't all that everybody said it was. Maybe.
Okay.
Brian Epstein, the record store manager who discovered and managed the Beatles, had died unexpectedly in August of 1967. Without the pressures and demands of touring, which they had stopped after 1966, and having reached the apparently historic peak of artistic and worldly success and fame, the Beatles were finally free from all constraints and paternal influences. So the author is kind of, it looks like the author's painting this picture of the Beatles being pressured to do a lot of things, and now that pressure's gone.
That's it. Yeah. So it's saying something along the lines of free from all the constraints and paternal influences. So they had probably managers and people, I mean, they say that kind of pressured them to do things that they may not have wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know how important it is, Jack, to be keeping track of these years, because we're here looking at Epstein dying in August of 67. But if we go back up to the previous paragraph, April of 68 is when they come back from India. So I'm assuming they're coming back from India because now they're free of these pressures and they're going to go on this transcendental meditation course.
Yeah. So it is kind of going back into history with Sgt. Pepper. I think they kind of point to the fact that this is their previous album, right? And what was happening there. So it is kind of giving you a historical trend, like a history of what's happening.
Okay. All right. When they eventually soured on meditation and the ashram culture, as Lennon would relate in his savage renunciation, Maharishi, eventually renamed Sexy Sadie, there were finally no father figures left at all. So again, the previous sentence, the paternal influences, and then this Maharishi being gone as well. No father figures. So again, just being free, it sounds like. To do what they want. All right, fourth paragraph. The sojourn in India, led by Harrison, had been an attempt to start over, accelerating the stripping away process that would culminate in their most ambitious musical project. So we're getting back to why they went to India, right? Trying to explain this journey. I remember talking about the next album, and George was quite strict, McCartney said. So we're given another name here. I don't think McCartney had been mentioned yet. So they're just talking about the process of discussing the album. He'd say, we're not here to talk music. We're here to meditate. So it sounds like some people wanted to talk business and some people wanted to just meditate. But the songwriting, inspired by the locale, the Maharishi's lectures, and especially the impromptu celebrity community there, had accelerated, and Lennon soon sent a postcard to Ringo Starr, who had tired of meditation sooner than the others and returned to London, saying, we've got about 2 LPs worth of songs now, so get your drums out. I think the author is basically painting a picture here of how important this trip to India had been to the next album.
Yeah, exactly. What's going on in that trip? They are what? They are meditating, and what is that meditating actually helping them with?
Well, kind of going back to maybe the previous paragraph, all of the paternal influences and demands, and so that maybe just getting away from I don't know, baggage, from stress, from whatever previous influence was there.
Yeah, exactly. Allowing them to kind of get away or strip away that previous baggage, right? And this kind of inspired them to focus on simplicity, right, around the world. Okay, sounds good.
All right, so this is an interesting passage because it's something fun, like music and how an album came to be, but the way that it's written, it's hard to follow. So this is a good passage.
That's the reason why, like I always say, focus on the style, right? The style is really important, and music passages are written differently than other passages, right? So if you have a hard time with music passages, it's not necessarily the topic, it's probably the way they write it, right? Now, this is not really necessarily music. This is more history, and I find that students have a hard time with history. So it's really like music history, but I would focus more on history if this is the kind of passages that are making you struggle.
It's funny, you said if you have a hard time, and the first thing that popped into my head was A Hard Day's Night, right? The Beatles song.
Yeah.
All right, so last paragraph here, passage 5. The Beatles' transition from performance to studio work and the atomized process it allowed and encouraged now reached its apotheosis. Ooh, big word. So this sentence, I would just move on thinking that I have no idea what it's saying other than potentially something allowed the Beatles to create an album.
Yeah, I mean, reached its whatever. You don't even need to know what that word means, but it probably reached the top, right? It reached its peak to some degree.
Yeah. Okay. George Martin, who was the Beatles' Maxwell Perkins, producing all but one of their albums, explained, quote, the ultimate aim of everybody had been to try and recreate on records a live performance as accurately as possible. We realized that we could do something other than that. Interesting. So they mentioned Maxwell Perkins. I don't think that person's been named at all, so I guess it's not important. But George Martin producing all these songs and just talking about what they were trying to do.
What are they trying to do?
Simulate a live performance.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's saying something about. Yeah. Okay. So let's go with that. Let's go with that and let's see where it goes.
Okay. Sgt. Pepper is a simulacrum of a performance. The concert crowds replaced by recorded cheering, but the new record would remove this narrative crutch. Okay, so now So the previous sentence was saying that's what they used to do, was to recreate a live performance. And then they realized they don't have to do that.
Exactly. So they're trying to get rid of this older style, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Also gone was the picturesque subject matter, the street landscapes and polite courtships, the elderly couples and fumbling suitors, and office workers trapped in suburban patterns, intruded upon by surrealism, like figures in Magritte paintings. So giving some examples here of potentially what was previously in their music that they don't do anymore.
Exactly. And I would associate these things with the older style.
Mm-hmm. In their place would be a clear, raw vision of an unsafe, chaotic world. All right. So this last paragraph here kind of showing a transition point, I guess, of what used to be with the Beatles and now what is.
Yeah. So they were right, doing all these live kind of performances, recordings, right? These recordings that kind of mimic live performances, and also this lovely kind of English world. But now they got rid of that, right? And they went into this clear and raw vision of an unsafe world, right? Whatever that means. So they're changing their style.
Yep.
I guess that's what happens when you go on a retreat.
Mushrooms will do that to you. Okay.
All right. So what's the big picture? I mean, what's the purpose of this passage? Like, what are they trying to tell us here?
So I think big picture is that. So it's interesting. I think there's a couple different potential stories here. That Sgt. Pepper, right? The Beatles released Sgt. Pepper, and it seemed like everybody thought it was amazing. Some people didn't like it, including potentially the Beatles themselves. They went on a retreat and got rid of all their baggage and started making music the way they wanted to. And the White Album was born from that, which is what the author says is basically the pinnacle of music.
That's it. That's exactly the main idea, right? The main idea is all about how they went on a retreat, they got rid of their baggage, or they got rid of their baggage and then they went on a retreat. Came back inspired, changed their style, unsafe. This is the new style, I guess. And there you go. That's really it.
All right, so there you have it. The Beatles' White Album. The best album ever, apparently, according to this author. If you want more passages to work on, you can sign up for Jack Weston's MCAT Cars passage every day in your inbox. Just go to jackweston.com, click on Practice, and then click on Cars Daily Passages. Enter your email address, and you will get passages directly to your inbox every day where you can go and learn more about cars and how to improve your car score, something that almost every student needs help with. I hope this was a great episode for you today. Don't forget to subscribe in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. I love saying podcasts. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT Cars Podcast.